Hello and welcome to the Rhythm Changes podcast. I'm your host, Will Chernoff, and I want to tell you about my second album, Maybe Eventually. I recorded it a few years ago. I've put it out on CD now for the first time, limited edition. I'm releasing it in a special, kind of personal way because it has a special personal story to me. It has my most frequent collaborators from the recent years. I'm playing electric bass, and with me is Francis Henson on guitar, Carson Toro on the drums. You can get your CD now in the mail from me with a personalized note. You go to my website, chernoffmusic.com, to order your copy now. That's chernoffmusic.com. Pick up a limited edition copy of my second album, Maybe Eventually. All right, if this is the first time you're listening, my voice doesn't always sound like this, okay? I'm sick right now, but this is an online recording, and that's my programming note in and of itself. I haven't done an online episode in probably almost 2 years. I've been focused on doing them all in person, and I've missed a couple of people who I really wanted to get to know more and talk to because I've made that choice, but I am making an exception for this man who's our guest, and I hope you enjoy the conversation that we had. Here we go. Our guest today is a drummer. He is a mainstay of Calgary jazz, an academic, an educator, a band leader with 2 albums. He's the author of 4 on the Floor, which I know as a great inspiration to me in the world of people putting stuff out about Canadian jazz on the web. So please welcome to this very special online episode from Calgary, John McCaslin.
Hey, Will, how's it going? It's great to be here.
Thank you. I haven't done an online one in a while. In fact, the last one I recorded, I went to Nanaimo to do it. And so there's going to be this one and that one. There's going to be 2 back-to-back episodes of people who aren't in Vancouver. It's wild.
Okay. Yeah. So I take it you usually do everything in person then.
You bet. You bet. So how is it in Calgary right now?
It's great. It's quite rainy, actually.
Oh, really? Well, it's beautiful over here. We're just getting into the May long weekend thing. So I'm really, really stoked. Things are lightening up. I'm feeling good. I want to start with your live playing because, I mean, I definitely want to talk about being a blogger and probably talk about that word too, and maybe some other words, but that's kind of the nerdier side of the conversation that makes me feel less lonely and satisfies me. So I want to get some of that in, but I definitely want to talk about the
Sure.
music too, live and recorded. So I want to start with live playing. One thing I know you've done recently, because again, it involved people from my neck of the woods, is you did something called tap bass drum with Jody Prosnick in the band and maybe some other people. Can you talk about that project?
Yeah. So tap bass drums. This is a project exactly as the name infers. It's a tap dancer, myself on drums, and a bass player. And the bass player being Vancouver's Jody Prosnick, who I've known and played with since the mid '90s, actually, going back to our time when we were both studying at McGill University in Montreal. And the tap dancer in question is a wonderful tap dancer by the name of Lisa Latouche, who is Canadian and originally from Calgary, but now based in New York City and has been in the U.S. for quite some time. And so this project basically explores the music and rhythmic possibilities of a very unique musical instrumentation. How this came to be over the course of the early days of the pandemic, I connected with Lisa. She had relocated back to Calgary during COVID, and so we started collaborating, working together, jamming in my basement. She would bring her tap board out, and I would set my drums up in the garage. And then we applied. We had the opportunity to participate in I guess call it an artist incubator program that was being put on by Arts Commons, which is quite a large arts entity here in Calgary that oversees I think it's the largest arts theater performance space entity in Western Canada. And so that was sort of an instigator for us to kind of figure out what we could do as a as a tap dancer and as a drummer. And we did some gigs, we did some concerts, we filmed a video, and then we through the course of a residency that I was doing at an art space. I figured, what could we do? What else could we do? So I invited Jody out to Calgary, and we workshopped some ideas as a trio. And we were like, "Oh, this is really cool. We've got something really interesting." And so, yeah. So fast forward another year, and Lisa and I were invited to be artists in residence through a pretty established dance company in Calgary called Decidedly Jazz Dance Works. And we brought Jody out, and we workshopped and put together a full-length 2-act show that features all three of us, and along with a giant screen featuring different types of projections, along with full staging and lighting. And then we had an opportunity to present that again last fall for the Fluid Festival, which is a dance festival here in Calgary. So Lisa's since moved back to New York City, because that's where all her work is, and of course Jody's in Vancouver and I'm in Calgary. So we're currently trying to figure out where the next gig is with this unique project.
Very nice. I have to shout out Arts Commons because they have paid me to write a little bit. The first time they did it was so much fun. I got to write about Booker T. Jones, Booker T. and the MGs before his concert in Calgary, and I learned so much about him. It was very fun.
Cool.
Big respect to them for that. Now, I would love to know when you have recently played as a band leader and just hear about that. And recently can be any number of years back that you like. I'm just curious. I know your 2 albums are kind of in different full-on periods of your life because of all the education and all the touring that you've done. But what has band leading been like for you over the last however long you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, my last record is called Sun Alta, which is on the Cellar Live label. I mean, that was recorded and released some time ago, like back in 2012. And I actually have a lot of music and a lot of ideas that I've been meaning to record. So that's sort of on my to-do list. But having said that, I've always got some kind of projects that I'm either leading or co-leading, and that I'm writing music for. Projects that I'm sort of instigating and creating. I think it's really important. I do a lot of work as a sideman, which is wonderful because it keeps me busy, and it gives me the opportunity to play with a lot of different music with a lot of different artists. And I really enjoy the challenge of learning new music and trying to give the music what it needs, for every different artist. But having said that, I think it's important that everybody have sort of their thing on the go as much as they can, as busy as they are. And for me, it's composing music. It's creating opportunities for myself and other musicians. Most recently, I premiered a new project of mine at the Mount Royal Conservatory here. They've got a new concert series they've just started, and it's just a trio, just a guitar trio with a wonderful guitarist who just recently moved to Calgary from Winnipeg, by the name of Aaron Shore, and a really wonderful bass player who you might know. He's originally from Calgary, but he lived in Vancouver for almost 10 years, and he just moved back to Calgary. His name's Jeff Gammon. So I'm really excited about this particular trio. We played kind of a mix of some of my favorite tunes and my original music, and I'm looking forward to developing this project. Earlier this year, for the month of January, I was the drummer and the musical director and composer with Decidedly Jazz Dance Works, the dance company that I just mentioned, and that was a really fun project. I've been working with this particular company pretty regularly on and off for about the last 12 years. But this was my first time having the opportunity to be the musical director and being asked to compose all the music and work with actually for this project, not just one choreographer, but actually 5 choreographers.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun. I sure learned a lot about band leading and about composing. And that music in particular was written for a piano trio, just piano bass drums. And so usually it's funny because these 2 past significant projects have been different kinds of trios, but I'd say, in the past, I'm usually kind of inclined to write, for some configuration of horns plus a rhythm section. Yeah, so that's sort of the 2, I guess, big projects that I've been involved in leading. Anyways.
Yeah, I have this first impression of you now because we're talking for the first time that you're very thoughtful about which words you use. And there's a word pair I want to discuss later with blogger, like I mentioned, but I love one that you put in there because I said, well, what are you doing as a band leader these days? And you use the word instigate. And I think that's such a cool contrast, instigate versus band lead, because instigate has so much more possibility. And I think it probably reveals a lot about how you see that as opposed to maybe the word band lead.
Well, I do believe strongly in the idea of being a leader in a community. I'm 47 years old now, and so I'm not exactly the young lion that but I think that there comes a responsibility that the older you get and the longer that you're in a community or in a scene that try to lead by example on and off the bandstand. But in terms of instigating, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I think, not only thinking about it, but acting on it as well. The nature of, the music scene, music community, the jazz scenes, jazz communities everywhere, how musicians make a living. So much has changed, in the last, I don't know, it's like 25, 30 years, and, things have changed dramatically. Things changed a lot over the course of the pandemic. I think that the pandemic actually maybe even sped up a lot of these changes that were happening. So I guess I'm lucky because when I was going to school, I grew up in Saskatchewan, but I moved to Montreal when I was 18. And I started at McGill in 1995. So, in the 90s and even in the early 2000s, there was a reasonable amount of work. I was able to not only learn when I was going to school from my teachers, but I was able to learn playing gigs. There was and when I would come home for the summers, I never got a summer job. I would just play gigs, and there was enough work that I could pay for school and all that stuff, and also, but I think significantly just get a lot of experience playing music, outside of the classroom and on the bandstand, and sort of learning as I go, and that's so important, I think. But there's not as much work as there used to be, and I think that for people who were used to just getting called all the time, I think the current reality is maybe a bit jarring and a bit of a shock because some musicians I think will always get called because they're they're really good at what they do, and they're in the right place at the right time, or whatnot. But I just think that while I'm thankful for the opportunities that come my way, um, I think we all have to be really proactive about creating opportunities and creating gigs and building capacity. Because I still think, well, I mean, Calgary, anyways, it's a it's a big city, but not in the same way as like Montreal or Toronto. It's a relatively young big city. So even despite the challenges of economy and cost of living, there's still I think a lot of potential, especially from the arts and the creative side things in this community. So I see myself as being someone that I'm not just going to stay home and wait for the phone to ring. I'm going to try and go out there and because like we don't have a jazz club in Calgary. The last real jazz club we had was a place called the Beatnik, and it changed ownership in 2012 actually. And so jazz venues in Calgary are always sort of this moving target. It's venues kind of come and go, and it's this place one week and this place another week. So without that sort of stability, if you want to do your thing and play your music and play it your way and under your terms, I think you have to be proactive about creating those opportunities rather than just sort of waiting for them to come, which sometimes they do, and that's awesome. But I think that and I learned this a lot from a lot of younger musicians, especially ones that didn't kind of grow up with more playing opportunities. It's like for them, going out there and hustling a gig and creating something, for them that's the norm, that's the starting point. And I really dig that. So yeah, so it's to me it's band leading, but it's also I think goes beyond just calling the shots from behind the drums and arranging music, and but also try and hopefully be a positive influence in the community at large as well.
You have to be an instigator. I love that
Yeah,
perspective. Thank you.
I think so. Yeah. Well, and I I'm just kind of reframing things that people have, I've heard, or people. I mean, Phil Dwyer, his great line that, he says you have to curate your life. He said that in a great interview with Jodie Prosnick when she was doing this sort of thing over COVID, and that really resonated. I mean, the other one, I remember when I was 18, I met and had the opportunity to play with Mike Downs, a wonderful bass player from Toronto, who I think he's absolutely brilliant, as a player, composer, arranger, teacher, administrator. He's got it all. And I remember asking when I was 18, I said, Hey Mike, what's it like to be a jazz musician? And he looked at me and he didn't even hesitate. He said, listen, John, he says, when you are a jazz musician, you are your own scene. And I was like, oh, okay. What does that even mean? And then like years later, I totally get it, and I think all the great musicians, period, they all demonstrate that, maybe in different ways. But somebody like Mike, for sure, he he's definitely his own scene, took care of business in so many different ways. And it's really, it's really motivating and inspiring. So,
Yeah. Okay. I want to do it. I want to go to the other word pair because you said the word. We're going to talk about Four on the Floor a little bit now. You've published on Blogspot for over 15 years. You hit the 15-year anniversary, and that's when I was like, I need to talk to John McCaslin. I'm so lonely as a publisher on the internet about jazz just for that alone. And then there's so much for us to talk about, of course, but you also describe yourself as a curator in what you do at Four on the Floor, not just a blogger. So that's the other one that I've been hyping up. What do you think about curator versus blogger? I've got my own thoughts too, but I want to hear yours. You go.
Well, to be perfectly honest, I think the word blogger is kind of an ugly word. I don't know.
I agree.
say blog. I have this image of like this kind of like a toad sitting on a log in a swamp, blogging. What does that mean? I don't know. It's one of those internet catchwords that somebody came up with and somehow it's stuck. But I guess, well, what can I tell? I can kind of take you back to the beginning. I remember, I guess sort of in the early to mid, well, probably mid 2000s. I was, this is before social media. This is before Facebook and before Twitter and YouTube, and certainly before Instagram or all the other stuff. And internet forums. I mean, they're still a thing, but there was a couple that I subscribed to. One in particular called Cymbalholics, which was run by a great drummer and cymbal enthusiast by the name of Chad Anderson, who's a wonderful, great musician, great drummer. And I just thought it was really cool how there was sort of this community, this online community of people who were just loved drums and loved cymbals, and it was really cool to see. I really learned a lot from the people that were posting and sharing and chiming in with all these things. And not long after that, I was reading the regular blog posts from people like Darcy James Argue, who I went to school with at McGill, and Ethan Iverson and Ronan Guilfoyle, great bass player from Ireland. And it was to me, I learned a lot, and I appreciated this sort of the community that they were online community that they were cultivating. While all at the same time I was trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I fit in on the internet? What does my internet presence look like? Because actually, interestingly enough, I never took the time to pay someone to set up a proper website, johnmccaslin.com, until I think it was the fall of 2020. It might have been even as late as 2021, when it was, we were in the pandemic, and I was like going through my list of things to do. And so, So, I just kind of, so here's the thing though. I mean, I remember when YouTube became a thing, and people were, posting, videos, of great jazz drummers doing their thing. And I remember, like, up until that, I remember, seeing video footage of great jazz drummers, even just great jazz performances. There actually wasn't a lot out there. Like, if it wasn't on DVD or VHS before that, it wasn't really accessible. But all of a sudden, this stuff was all popping up on the internet, and you could share it. And so if I saw something cool, I would put it into an email, and then I would email, all my drummer friends and anybody I thought would be interested. And how it is with mass emails. It can kind of get a bit, I don't know, annoying. It can kind of clog up your inbox. And so, with that in mind, I was like, well, maybe I'll try this blog thing and share it with everybody, share it with the world. I mean, at the very least, I'm kind of creating a bookmark or a record of something that I was interested in, and then I can go back and I can find it and read it, right? So it didn't really bother me if nobody actually read it. I was like, at the end of the day, I was kind of just posting these things and sharing them, so I would have a digital paper trail, and I could go back and reference it. This was 2007 spring, about this time of the year, 2007, and I was kind of finishing up my coursework and was getting ready for my candidacy exam at the University of Toronto. So I'd spent that past 2 years actually doing a lot of research, internet-based research, but also just libraries, periodicals, recordings, journal articles, reading other people's dissertations and whatnot. So I was kind of in that zone of like digging stuff up, and then with the intention of eventually writing my own thesis and disseminating that. So yeah, I was like, okay, what do I do? So I was like, basically, okay, I could pay someone to create a website, or I can do it for free on Blogger, which is through Google, Gmail, or WordPress was the other one. But WordPress looked a little bit more complicated, so I went with Blogger, and it's a pretty simple platform, but I've kind of figured out how to make it work for me. I hope they don't shut it down. I mean, because I know like they gave up updating it years ago. It's just there and exists in its form, and I don't even know how many other people are using it, but for 15 years it's been sort of my go-to. Yeah, and so I just kept at it, and for a while, the first couple of years, I was blogging and sharing things that I thought were interesting anyways, for like sometimes as frequently as every day. But like once my son was born and things got busier professionally, I had to kind of scale it back to make it more sustainable. So now I post, I try to do something once a week, and that seems to be, and just make something short and sweet. So I know that somebody who's maybe checking in to read it, they won't be inundated with a lot of stuff to read. They can kind of get the gist of it by, in 2 minutes or less or whatever. Yeah. And then, I discovered, I met John Riley, great drummer, plays with the Vanguard Orchestra, and he's a pretty prolific author, a drum teacher, teaches at the Manhattan School of Music, and he knew about my blog, and he said he kind of dropped the names of all these other pretty well-known jazz drummers that were also reading it and checking it out, and so that was pretty validating. Connecting with Joe LaBarbera and Adam Nussbaum too, they were the same, and not only that, but they were like sharing all the stuff with their students as well, and with other drummers. And so I was like, oh, okay, wow, this is pretty cool. I mean, I'm actually kind of building a bit of an audience here. And so I just kind of put my head down and I've just been plugging away. I would say though that things definitely, I think my viewership increased significantly when I started sort of integrating my blog posts with social media. So, I share everything through Facebook. I've got a dedicated Four on the Floor page on Facebook. I've got a dedicated Twitter account, or X, or whatever it is. I don't actually read anything on Twitter. I just literally log in, post my thing, and then I get out of there. I don't doom scroll or anything.
Smart man.
Yeah. Instagram though, I mean, I would say that Instagram has been probably the funnest, because it's not only a platform that I use to share my own blog posts, but I'll just post a photo of a great drummer I think everybody should know about, unrelated completely to any kind of blog posts, and then people would be like, who is that? And I'm like, oh, well, this is so-and-so, and you got to check this guy out. These are the records. And, and then over COVID, I was doing, a regular interview series, called it Four on the Floor Live, using Instagram Live. And I've actually done that for the last 3 years. And I'll probably do a bunch of interviews here in the next month. It's different now because, back in over COVID, everybody was at home. Cats had a lot of time, but now, people are busy, people are on the road and playing and whatnot. So it's a little bit harder to kind of get people nailed down for interviews like this, but it's going to happen. Yeah. And so, here I am 15 years later, and I'm just kind of doing my thing, just trying to, share, my passion for the drums, my passion for the music, and just basically sharing things that I happen to find interesting, and hopefully finding someone else who finds them interesting as well.
Yeah, I think of you as a curator, and I think it's so much a compliment and a distinct area from whatever it is that I'm doing, because I'm not really doing that. And so I really appreciate that you do it, because the amount of stuff out there in the world, right, globally, not locally, like what I'm doing, that I can discover by following Four on the Floor is so much higher than like whatever I would end up curating while I kind of do my thing that's a lot narrower, I think that's really interesting that there's so much room on both those sides for us to do both those things. But they're very different, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And that was sort of a question I had for myself when I started this, is like, well, what's the focus? And it's definitely taken different forms at different times. I mean, the focus has always been on jazz drumming. But at the very beginning, I was like sharing some of my favorite recipes, for my favorite, my sister-in-law shared with me her favorite black bean chocolate cake, and my favorite leftover turkey chowder recipe, and actually surprisingly, when I checked the statistics on my blog, evidently that's a hit, because people are checking that up still. But I definitely have an affinity for the state of jazz and the legacy of jazz here in Canada. So I'm always, if it's the right fit, I'm always interested in highlighting what's happening in terms of jazz drumming here in Canada. There's so many great drummers from coast to coast. And also, talking about, maybe lesser known drummers who are no longer around or no longer active, that I think that people should know about. Like, for instance, Claude Ranger, who was an incredible drummer, and his story is just to me, so interesting, and tragic too. I don't know if you're familiar with his story, but he basically vanished in the early 2000s, and nobody knows if he's still alive. Nobody knows if he's dead or what happened to him. And Mark Miller wrote an incredible book about Claude. And there's not a lot of recordings out there, although there are several noteworthy ones. There's a little bit of video footage out there, not very much, and I've tried to share all that. But I mean, he was like Canada's Elvin Jones, Jack DeJohnette, and Tony Williams all rolled into one.
Huh.
And I think every young jazz drummer in the country should know who he is. And often we look to other parts of the world for inspiration, but there's stuff happening here, and there always has been, and I think it's important we recognize that, because for all the Claude Rangers, Terry Clarks, Jim Blackleys, Buff Allens, Bob McLaren's, Andre White's, man, I just could kind of go on and on. Like we do what we do because they did what they did. We're very much standing on their shoulders, I feel. So that's sort of a part of it too. Sometimes I've done some interviews and features with non-drummers, and featured their records. But I've kind of tried to maybe move away from that a little bit, because it's well, I want to feature, it's not a blog about reviewing records. There's other people who do that and do that well. But I try to keep somewhat of a focus, but it's also very flexible too. It's like I'm the president and CEO. I can do whatever I want, and I think I've got a big enough audience now that if people don't dig it, that's cool. Maybe they'll come back, or attract some other people. So yeah, but I don't know. I mean, the audience and the viewership, it never really mattered to me, to be honest. I just figured, it's if people find it and people dig it, that's great. But it's like I said, it's really just kind of a repository, for stuff that I happen to think is interesting. So
Yeah, I mean, a bold claim that I could make would be that that's actually the secret. Like the fact that you have cared so little about that is one of the primary reasons why you've been able to do it for 15 years, and that there's so many checkpoints along the way where if you care about it too much, then you might end up falling off.
yeah, and it's interesting to me because, well, a couple points. Anyways, I mean, remember over the years, there's been a lot of people who would start a blog and they would keep it going for maybe 6 months to a year, but then they would kind of run out of, I don't know, run out of ideas, or just run out of energy, and the momentum would kind of grind to a halt, and that was it. And then I know there's some other bloggers that, their writing was very, they wrote a lot, like very journalistic, I might even say. Like they wrote a lot of words. Like when they would post something, it was like a full-on article.
Ethan Iverson.
And well, yeah, but he's really good at that, and he strikes a really good balance, because I find that he writes in a way, using a language that draws you in, rather than sort of pushes you away, or and I remember for the longest time I was like, man, is that what I have to do? Because I had to kind of learn how to write, well, I had to teach myself how to write throughout the process of writing my dissertation. And I was of the opinion that it was like, well, if I'm going to write these blog posts, and if I have to aim for it to be an article every single time I do it, I'm not sure I have the time to do that. But then I used to follow this online internet kind of guru. His name's Seth. Yeah. And he wrote something that was really validating. He was like, don't write a ton of stuff. Keep it short and sweet and bite-sized, and that's what's going to keep people engaged, because people are so busy. They don't actually have time every day to sit and read a whole thing. They want something quick and easy. So that's sort of my strategy. It was just make it easily digestible, and it turns out that that's actually way more sustainable as well.
Yeah. I'll send this to you after. During COVID, I called into Seth's podcast and I asked him a question about Spotify and stuff like that. I'll send you his response.
Amazing.
And what I asked. Yeah,
I would love to see that. Yeah. Well, it's interesting nowadays, like, I'm just trying to think if there's even any other blogs that I actually follow, but I mean, Substack is really, that's really the thing now. And I don't know if I'll transfer my thing over to that or not. But it seems, I can't speak to the platform itself in terms of how it works, but you can get paid, right? People, in fact, I subscribe to several Substack subscriptions because I think they're great. And, I just pay something a little bit every month. And, my thing is, I don't do any advertising. The little money that I've made through Four on the Floor has been through selling T-shirts, which actually I've only done, I think I did my first run about 5 years ago, and it's actually surprising. People are into T-shirts. Who knew?
It's like being in a band, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as somebody who has subscribers at Rhythm Changes, I'm very thankful for folks like you. You make the world go round, what you were talking about with Substacks there.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me like it's a good, the model seems to work. So, hopefully that's got some legs, and it'll be around, and it'll encourage people to, that's the cool thing is, like, you don't need permission from anybody to do this kind of thing. You don't need permission from anybody to start a podcast. You don't need permission for anybody to write a blog or a Substack or create a YouTube channel or do anything. Anybody can do it. I guess for me, when I discovered that, people from around the world were, and including a lot of really, notable drummers, including many of my heroes, were, checking in to see what I was sharing, you gotta be careful about what it is you're putting out there, because you have no idea who's reading it. And so, you learn as you go. I've certainly been corrected and fact checked, and people have offered different opinions to contrast what I was sharing or how I was sharing it, and that's cool. That's fine. It's at the end of the day, it's just me in my basement, with whatever happens to be on my mind, and so.
Well, come on. If I had to define the word blogger, I couldn't find a better definition than just me in my basement. Yeah. I love that. Thank you. That's what I was lonely for. When I said I'm lonely, I need to do an episode with John, that kind of discussion, because there's not that many people, doing this kind of thing, at least in Canada. And certainly the people who are doing it very, very well, we all know who they are. We mentioned Ethan Iverson. There's so many other ones.
Yeah.
Need to go all the way through. So there's a lot of inspiration out there, and you're one of mine.
Well, thanks. And props to you too. I don't know if you've run across Patrick Boyle yet, but he's a good friend of mine. Incredible trumpet player. He teaches at University of Victoria, and we did our graduate work together at the U of T. And we both share this affinity for Canadian jazz and the legacy of Canadian jazz, and the legacy of obscure Canadian jazz. And we talk about this all the time, how there's not a lot of I guess let's say entities in terms of Canadian media that are advocating for Canadian jazz music. There used to be a lot more, specifically coming out of the CBC, and just media in general. I think about people like Tommy Banks, or I don't know, even Rob McConnell. There's recordings of live studio sessions that they were recorded by the CBC. I think that there was just a lot more opportunities for people to hear and see jazz on television or hear it on the radio. Even Mark Miller had a regular column in the Globe and Mail. I learned about jazz music and through listening to Katie Malick, on Sunday nights on Jazz Beat on CBC radio, and there was a long-standing program called After Hours, hosted by Ross Porter. But even going back, I remember, when I was a kid, I used to listen to a late night jazz program that was on every night on CBC called Easy Street with, her name was Margaret Pochu, I think, and so, I just think that, jazz music is not in the mainstream. It's just there's just not as many people advocating for it, in the media in Canada. So, the few people that do have radio programs, I'm going to shout out my good friend Tim Ma, who's got a great program here in Calgary on CJSW, a program called Jazz Today, where he focuses on new music that's either out of Canada or from the U.S. or wherever, and that's really important, And I think what you're doing is very significant because uh, you're bringing attention uh, and on important things that are happening in this music in your community, right? And I think that there's important things happening in terms of jazz in every community in Canada, but a lot of it unfortunately goes under the radar, for various reasons. So I think if every city had somebody doing what you're doing, that would be a good thing.
I mean, I absolutely have said that several times. I have thought specifically about Calgary for sure, and it's like, well, what would it take to have a rhythm changes in Calgary? And I always think about it in terms of you copy and paste the model. It is not possible for me to open a Calgary chapter. It's not
Right.
possible. I don't think it's advisable. I would never um, seriously entertain the idea. It would have to be copied and pasted the model, which is a good model, I think, like you're talking about with Substack, by somebody who's in Calgary and knows the
Yeah.
Calgary stuff. Like there's no way you could look at what I'm doing and be like, well, the thing that you should do is like expand to every Canadian city. It's like, no, that would never work in terms of effort and in terms of like outcomes. It would never work.
Yeah, it definitely, you know, all this stuff takes time and energy, and for someone like myself, just figuring out the technology too. So
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I am about 20 years younger than you. I think one of the chronic faults of my generation is, we're talking about, oh, the secret is maybe you care about something other than how many people are reading it. I think for a lot of folks like myself, we just care too much just because it's been like in the water for us in such a way,
Mhm.
like I feel really trapped by that and I have to escape that and try to care less because sometimes I end up caring too much. Yeah.
Well, sure. I mean, as I mentioned, I don't make any money off this. However, I will say that it's probably, well, let me put it this way: when I go to New York City, or I go to a major American city and I meet other drummers, in jazz clubs, it's not uncommon that they know who I am and that they've been following my blog, right? And my professional activities, such as they are, or even just having a static website with my information on it, would never ever have achieved that, So
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I think it's only natural, you put your heart and soul and your time and your energy into something, you want to get recognized for it. You want to see some, fruits of your labors, right? But yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think in this day and age, where so much of what we do and how we do it is influenced by the way that social media works, it can be very easy to get caught up in, um, how many likes a given post. I will say this: whenever I post something about Elvin Jones, even if it's just a photo, the amount of traffic that I get to Instagram or to my blog, like it, multiplies exponentially. People love photos of Elvin Jones. So, but I've been like, oh, it's been a slow week. Okay, I'll post this photo of Elvin. Bang, there you go. you know, but I think that if you can kind of put that aside and you can look at the bigger picture, how you're contributing to your immediate community and again contributing to the community at large. I think that sort of helps fuel your passion for what you're doing.
Yeah, 100%. It's such an opening experience for me that's opened me up to the world in so many ways. I'm so grateful for it. Yeah. Yeah. I want to come back to the music side, and we haven't talked about your two albums that much. I mean, I'll just say Yeah, one of them is available for sale because it's on Seller. It's basically a Vancouver jazz album. You've
That's
got a
right.
ridiculous band. It's on the Seller Bandcamp. You can buy it on digital and CD. That's the Sun Alta. That's the album you were talking about. Then you have an older album called McCallum's Island that I found that's not quite in like a mainstream sales channel so much the same way. I was able to check it out, but there are
Oh, okay.
those two albums, right?
Where did you find it?
You search the internet. I found it. You had it hosted on a SoundCloud somewhere. That's why I was
Oh
able to
yes, that's right. I got it on SoundCloud. Yeah, so that was my first record, and that was recorded in 2002. And it was all my original compositions, and that was a band that played together a lot when I was living in Montreal. And yeah, that one was just self-produced. I just yeah got it up there. I didn't have a record label. I didn't have any kind of distribution. iTunes wasn't even a thing then, let alone Spotify or any of that. So yeah, the only way that I could sell product was on gigs or on consignment in CD stores. And believe it or not, I actually I didn't sell them all. I've still got a small box of about maybe 40 copies left. But I sold a lot of CDs and was able to pay for the record, and yeah, had something to show for it, which is incredible because I don't think I could do that now. I mean, in fact, I think my next record, I don't think I'll even print CDs. Maybe a vinyl record, but people just don't buy physical copies of music like they used to. Yeah, and so that was got a lot of mileage out of that record and that band. We played at the Montreal Jazz Festival, played around Montreal. I did a couple small tours of Western Canada. And yeah, then the fast forward 10 years later, my second record, that was definitely a dream band. I had known that I wanted to record with Jody Prosnick and Tilden Webb for a long time because I'd known them since I was 18 and played with them in Montreal. And then yeah, at one point I had a chance to play with Brad, and of course he's incredible. But it wasn't until I met Phil Dwyer. I met Phil in 2010 at a workshop at the Banff Center, and we had a chance to do some playing together. I was like, okay, he's the piece of the puzzle for this project, for this band. And so yeah, we recorded that in Vancouver and in Brad's studio, and did a few weekends at the Cellar, and yeah, that was a really fun project, fun band. And then I have enough original music written that I could probably record another 5 records. But it's been the last number of years, it's been pretty busy, professionally, between playing and teaching, and I've got a family at home as well, and then of course I was working towards my doctoral studies too. I had to research and write my dissertation too, so that took a big chunk of time. But yeah, so I've written a lot of music, and I've had the opportunity to play it with a lot of great musicians over the last 10, 12 years. It's just I need to make a point of documenting it, and I think sometimes, I think having a deadline is sort of the mother of all motivators. So, I think I probably just need to book a recording studio, and then like, oh, okay, I've got this date coming up. I better hire some musicians and write and arrange some music that sounds good, and yeah. But it's intimidating. I'm not going to lie. I find it intimidating because, like I said, like back in the day, you could self-produce a record and sell it off the bandstand, and you could sell a lot. But nowadays, it's like, well, how do you get your music out there? Well, I mean, I would say, the writing and the recording part is probably the easy part. Translating that into a product, whether it's digital or some form of a physical product. And then connecting that with an audience is challenging. and then adding on top of that the economic reality of trying to make money off of a record. I don't know. From what I've seen, it's pretty much impossible. To think about paying for the record and everything just through selling copies. I think for me, you have to kind of think. I try to think bigger picture that it's like, well, what kind of opportunities are you going to create through through spending the money and investing that money to record a record and whatnot. So it'll pay off, I think, in different ways, not necessarily monetary ones. So it's still an investment, and not a cheap one, but I think it's important for so many reasons. So that's what I tell myself anyways. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, first of all, I would very much look forward to that album. So selfishly, I'd love it to come out someday. It would sound awesome.
Well, you're not the only one. Yeah, people are telling me all the time, when's your next record coming out? And I'm always kind of like, yeah, I know. I'm working on it, but I've been saying that for a while. So
yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts on that. It's such a fascinating area that's right close to my heart because I've put out 2 albums as well and been in a band that I started and all that good stuff, right? But like I also worked for record labels, including Cellar, always kind of part-time, but loving the process and learning so much and all the ups and downs of that roller coaster, right? So I have so many thoughts about that. Far too many for today, right? So
well, I look forward to hearing them in another podcast.
Exactly. Or if I get out to Calgary or something in the near future and we get to sit down or something.
Cool.
I want to go out with this. Please indulge me and let this set up. I have to unfold something for you here. This is about a piece of work that you did in the 2000s. So one of the first jobs that I had was I played with a youth violin ensemble called the North Shore Celtic Ensemble. And 5 years into my time playing with them, we met this guy named Dean Marshall.
Oh, yeah.
And we met these 3 guys, actually, Dean Marshall, Tony Moore, and John Croasman. And they administrated and ran what I think is one of the greatest Calgary musical products of all time, Barrage.
Yep.
Is the name of it. And you played with Barrage. And we met them, and they were taking us on one of their educational tours with youth groups that we did. So we traveled with them all over China in 2018 and had a grand time with them and like 100 student performers in total. So I met these people and you played in Barrage, which I think is so cool.
Yeah. Well, that was, a departure for me musically. But it was a show and it was a steady gig. And so, yeah, I was living in Montreal in 2004, and then this opportunity came up to tour with the show, and so I packed everything up at the last minute and moved to Calgary. And the show Barrage, it was I think it was 7 violinists and then a 4-piece rhythm section, and we played every style of music under the sun, arranged for this violin ensemble. It was all choreographed, and there, lighting and smoke and lasers, high energy. And we toured all over the world. And I was with that show just shy of 2 years before I left. And that's when that was 2006. So that was when I became a Calgarian and started to put down some roots out here in Western Canada, rather than return out east to Montreal.
Yeah, you put down roots, and Sun Alta, that's the name of the place where you went to live, right?
Yeah, Sun Alta, it's a neighborhood in southwest Calgary. Yeah, and I lived there for just under a year. It was an old brick apartment building that I inherited from my girlfriend at the time, now my wife. She'd moved to the Okanagan, so I took over her apartment, and it was a pretty hip apartment in a beautiful neighborhood, and I thought it was a pretty cool name too. So I thought it'd make a good name for a record.
It does. It does. Yeah. Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you. I feel less lonely, as I said, and
Yeah.
I've learned so much from you. I have learned a lot from you over the years, even before we ever talked. So yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Well, thanks. I'm flattered that first of all, you're doing what you're doing, and I'm flattered that you're interested in what it is I'm doing. Because at the end of the day, I'm not sure I know what I'm doing, but I'm doing something. I think that's a start, anyways.
Me neither, but it's all good.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Rhythm Changes podcast. If you enjoyed it, become a member for free today at rhythmchanges.ca. You will get the free weekly email where I send out content about artists, events, recordings, new episodes of this podcast to coming up on 1,000 people in our community. I want to keep track of that milestone as we get closer to it. Rhythm Changes is a Turned Off Music production. This episode was hosted, produced, mixed, and edited by me, and I'll catch you on a future installment of the show. Thank you.